Welcome to the Glenn Beck program. We have a lot to talk about tonight. This is one that I want you to share with your friends. America right now seems to be talking about a couple of things. Donald Trump, who is trying to find the president's birth certificate with a metal detector or whatever, and that the president didn't recognize Easter. He celebrates Passover and Ramadan, but apparently didn't fully recognize Easter. And neither did Google, you know. But they did recognize this one. This is great. And then they followed up with celebrating renowned French-American ornithologist John James Audubon. This was today. Ooh. Wow. I think there was a holiday in between those two things there, Google, but, you know, you may have missed him. I mean, sure, you missed Jesus, but you got the bird guy. So, I mean, that's who I'd go for, too, is the bird guy. Look, here's the point. This is all a distraction. I mean, the president loves the birth certificate, loves the birth certificate argument, loves it. It's a poke in the eye, and it just makes people look ridiculous. It really does. And Easter, it stops us from talking about what's really happening. If we're arguing he didn't issue an Easter message, really, then we don't focus on what's really happening. Look at the things that are happening not far away on the other side of the world, but on our own border, in our own bank accounts. What freedom is Cass Sunstein regulating out of your life today? Fortunately for us, we meet here every day at 5 o'clock. Unfortunately for those in the White House, we meet here every day at 5 o'clock. We won't be distracted by the nonsense because there's a lot to discuss. America, I warn you that today's show is not for the faint-hearted, at least the first 15 minutes of this. By the way, hello, America. The world is getting all geared up for the next peace flotilla. It's being prepared right now, and it's set to depart for the Gaza Strip late next month. And what is it, about 1,000 people are attending? Oh, it's going to be good. Forget about the plight of the Christians in China, or the Christians in Iraq, or the Coptic Christians in Egypt, or the Jews in Israel. Let's concentrate as a planet on the plight of the Palestinians. Let's make sure they're heard. I'm telling you, mark my words, it's going to seem all logical. By September, a Palestinian state will happen, and Israel will be sold down the river. It will happen. I believe the setup is all being placed right now, and it all starts to roll over the summer. Now, at the same time that the current administration could not contain their excitement about the responsibility to protect doctrine, which was deemed an acceptable reason to start a conflict, dare I call it a war, with Libya. The responsibility to protect idea was conjured up by Samantha Power. There she is, little Miss Cass Sunstein. She is no fan of Israel. One of the core principles, and this is important that you get this, on responsibility to protect, where a population is suffering serious harm as a result of internal war, insurgency, repression, or state failure, and the state in question is unwilling or unable to halt or avert it, the principle of non-intervention yields to the international responsibility to protect. Do you have it? There is no such thing as a sovereign border anymore. It's your responsibility as a globe to intervene. Got it? Let me give you some numbers here. Before we intervened in Libya, the death toll was 1,000. That's bad. In Syria, they're screaming, we've got a responsibility to protect. 400. Let me give you another number. 35,000. 35,000. That's the number of people killed on our border in drug-related killings since December 2006. If 2006 in December sounds familiar, it's when Felipe Calderon took office and declared war on the drug gangs, and he's clearly losing. Execution-style killings, shootouts, towns being burned down, kidnappings, attacks on authorities, fear, chaos. It's getting worse. The killings jumped 60% in 2010. 15,273. That is up from 9,616 the previous year. Estimate for this year already at 2,833. Mass graves are now being found at an alarming rate. Any mass grave should be alarming. Usually, it's our troops that find the mass graves. But now they're becoming a routine discovery on our border in Mexico. People are beginning to have the courage to say something. Just last week, authorities found a mass grave with 30 bodies in it. This discovery comes on the heels of another mass grave found in the border region with at least 126 people inside that grave. People in this farming town of 60,000 were afraid to say anything. They watched as people were killed and dumped into mass graves, afraid to say help. They didn't know who to ask for help. Most of the bodies that the authorities are now finding are being killed execution style, but not with bullets. I warn you, this next part of this story is pretty disturbing. But I think you need to hear the scene. This is what they believe happened in the town of San Fernando. 177 people have just been found in the largest mass grave to date. Most of these people were simply stopped at a roadblock set up by drug lords. Imagine yourself in this situation. Most of the people, they believe, were pulled and dragged off buses one by one. Then they were stripped of their IDs and their bus ticket stubs, so no one could identify them. Then the report says that they were killed with blunt trauma to the head, which explains the lack of bullet casings in the graves and explains the sledgehammer that was found. Now imagine you're on a bus. You're just minding your own business. And the bus is stopped, and now you see people being pulled out one by one, being dragged out, and somebody is putting their foot on their back as somebody else takes a sledgehammer and crushes their head. Well, you're in a whole different category of hell now, aren't you? Oh, yeah, I know. I'm hoping this for the New York Times is not too depressing. I hope this isn't too conspiratorial for them to understand. Sledgehammers are being used, not bullets. And it's not because there's a shortage of bullets. It's because we are dealing with evil. The Washington Post is reporting that the cartels are not just taking areas over with firepower anymore. They are taking them over with sheer terror. One San Fernando resident reported that it is getting completely out of control. They're not just going after the rich and the people with money. They're doing it for their kicks. They're doing it for power. They kidnapped a local farmer's son. They demanded $10,000. He's not a rich man. $10,000. He didn't have $10,000. He managed to scrape together $5,000. It's all he had. He sent it to them. So they sent half of his son back to him. Just this weekend, 4 women and a teenage girl were found stripped, their throats slashed in an Acapulco beauty parlor. In the same city last month, 5 children were killed in a 5-day stretch, ages 4 to 15 years old. The 4-year-old's mother was found bound, gagged, and she had been gunned down in her car. The 4-year-old was sitting next to her mother in the car, so they shot her in the chest, killing her too. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the president's birth certificate, shall we? No, I think that's really important, his birth certificate. Let's talk a little bit about what Google is doing, and did he recognize Easter? That's so important right now, isn't it? What the hell is wrong with us? 35,000 people dead. 35,000 people. 15,000 in the last year. Do we have a responsibility to protect? If your answer is no, Mr. President, it doesn't seem real consistent with Libya. Do you even care? Would you at least agree that we should try to stop the violence from spilling over into our country? Don't think it can't happen here? Ask the people in Brownsville, Texas. They know. But many are afraid even in America. Someone driving on Highway 77 Easter Sunday noticed something on the overpass. In Brownsville, Texas, they phoned it in. It ended up being an IED. This is not a picture from Baghdad. This is a picture from America. You remember IEDs, improvised explosive devices that the terrorists used as their most prolific weapon in Iraq? It caused most of the problems for our troops. If you remember, most of the IEDs were made in Iran. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. Before we get to the birth certificate thing, let's not forget about the training manual found in the Arizona desert along a known smuggling route that celebrates suicide bombers. Fox reported exclusively on this. Have you seen it anyplace else? The book, In Memory of Our Martyrs, was published in Iran and has glowing biographies of suicide bombers and other militants who died while committing terrorist attacks. Authorities said the IED looked like a pineapple grenade, except it came with a timer device. The highway was shut down. Bomb squad sent the robot in to detonate it. Some now are just brushing this off, saying, oh, well, it's just a poorly made device. It couldn't have done much damage anyway. Oh, well, I feel so much better now. Shouldn't be worried about that. Really? Can we not worry about the quality of the bomb and worry about the fact that someone is making bombs and putting them on American bridges? Now, who could possibly be doing that? No, let's talk about the birth certificate. Mexican soldiers, we don't want to talk about the Los Zetas. They blew up at least 22 cars and killed dozens of people in the last 2 weeks in Mexico. What is their weapon of choice, America? If you say IED, bingo. But wait, that's Mexico, not Texas. Who are the Zetas? Do you even know? They are the elite former special forces with the Mexican military. These are the people that they were going to stop the drug lords, but they defected. They defected from the Mexican military in the late 1990s, and they have been breeding more. They're particularly feared because they were trained by the American military elite. We went down with a responsibility to protect. We tried to help. They were sent in to fight the drug cartels. Now they are the drug cartels. Here's the important part. Los Zetas now are operating in the U.S., and they have been blamed for hundreds of kidnappings and murders along the U.S. border. But is anybody worried about that? Hell no. They often work alongside Mexican drug cartels who are operating, now it is reported, in as many as 230 affiliate cities here in the United States. The CIA believes the Zetas may be also getting help from terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. No! This crisis is far larger and far closer to home than the plight of the poor Palestinians. Is there any other conflict that has killed as many in the last 4 years than the Mexican drug cartels and the Zetas have killed on our borders? 35,000 dead. The genocide in Rwanda and Darfur comes to mind, but we didn't seem to have a responsibility to protect there. Couldn't get anybody to pay attention to that one, could we now? Hundreds of thousands have died there in the last 4 years. But the world still has no responsibility to protect. 35,000 deaths in Mexico. You know how many that is? Well, we've lost 35,000 people before, but you have to go back to the Korean War to find it. And nobody's paying attention. Did you see what Google did with James Audubon? There are two things here that America should be asking. First, our responsibility to protect. Do we as good neighbors have any responsibility? Do we play a role in this at all? We funded and created the Zetas, just like we did in the Middle East with Al-Qaeda. Hello? They're literally in our backyard, and they are burying bodies while our kids are playing in the backyard. And I mean that literally. And what are we doing? We're neighbors. They're burying bodies, kidnapping, killing. Our kids are over here, and we're arguing about whether or not we should put a fence between us. The second thing is, what is our administration doing about this? Is our DOJ on this? Are they beefing up security on our borders? Are they cracking down on illegal immigrants? Are they looking for the Zetas in the 230-plus cities? No. No. God forbid somebody has the audacity to ask for papers. Because if you ask for papers, you're clearly a racist who just hates everybody who's different than you. Oh, my gosh, are we going to be remembered as a suicidal nation? Just this week, the president spoke glowingly of illegals who cross into America via the Rio Grande and compared those who came the right way through Ellis Island. Watch our president at work.
You live up to the idea that no matter what you look like or where you come from, whether you landed here, your ancestors landed here on Ellis Island, or they came here on a slave ship, or they just came over the Rio Grande, that we are all connected to one another, and we all rise and fall together.
If you just came over the Rio Grande, you are the same as somebody who came over in a slave ship. Wow! Mr. President, it does matter how you got here. One group came over to America legally. The other group, illegally. One broke the law, one did not. It's not the same, Mr. President. We are all humans and we are all people, but we are all not Americans. Congressman Luis Gutierrez from Illinois, he's urging the president to just bypass the system. Well, why not? We practically destroyed it. He said, use your executive power or else, Mr. President, Latinos will not vote for you. Watch.
If the Congress will not act, then use the powers you already have. Use the powers that the Congress has already granted you. To the man that we elected President of the United States, yes, with our vote, with our energy, with our commitment, we sent him to the White House. And we want to remind him of the words that he uttered to us in order to gain our vote and our confidence, and to say, Mr. President, it's time you keep your promise. It's time you keep your...
We are building a dictatorship. But let's talk about the man's birth certificate. We have a responsibility to protect. That much is true. But first and foremost is to protect and defend the people and the Constitution of the United States of America. That is our responsibility to protect. Are we doing that? We are letting the drug cartels seep across our border. We are asking for a dictator. We're doing something else. We're setting up the gun manufacturers in our own country. I want you to chew on this. Think about this. There's a story out now that we set up the gun dealers on our border. The ATF goes to the small gun dealers on the border, asks them, can you help your country? Sell guns to us. And what we're going to do is we're going to give them to nefarious people and track them across the border. Then the government does a study and finds out guns are going across the border with nefarious people. And they're being used to kill people with. Now the ATF won't respond to Congress on why this happened. So let's see if we have this right. We sold out our gun dealers. Then I read this little Cass Sunstein story. The ends justify the means. Why not help guns across the border? Then report how many guns were used in illegal activity. And then, mark my words, not come to defend the lawsuits against the gun manufacturers here in the United States, because that's what's happening. Mexico is considering now suing the gun manufacturers. They're going to put them out of business. If you can't change the Constitution, destroy it. Go around it. What was Mr. Gutierrez? What did he just say? Doesn't it make more sense to sue America for not protecting the borders and stopping that? I mean, they have much deeper pockets. They're more involved than the gun manufacturers. It's a way to put gun manufacturers out of business without our government having to change a word in the Constitution. Oh, lawsuits are good, aren't they, Mr. Obama? This administration is using the border to take out our enemies and to feed off the chaos and trouble. I'm going to show you something next that, for the life of me, for the whole time I've done this show, I could explain a lot of things. I can't explain this. This comes from the State Department. We've been on the phone with them all day. I don't have the answer. I think it ties into the border, but you're going to have to decide. I don't have an answer to the new way you have to fill out. Possibly some people, they won't identify, some people will have to fill this questionnaire out to get a passport. Watch next. How's that? All right, we showed you just a couple of minutes ago what our administration is doing on the border. It makes no sense, right? We're just ignoring it. The next story I'm about to show you makes even less sense. Reason.com linked to a story yesterday from a website called ConsumerTraveler.com. And this report is baffling. I saw it last night about 8 o'clock last night. And I said, can somebody verify any of this, please? It's baffling to say the least. There's a new supplemental application that you may have to fill out in order to get a passport. And here's the easy application. It's so easy. This one is 2 pages. The new one is 5. It may make things a little harder for you to get a passport, or easier for the government to deny a passport. After becoming aware of the new questionnaire through the governmental website federalregister.gov, anytime the government issues new paperwork, they have to go through the OMB, okay? The Office of Budget Management, and they have to estimate things like, here it is, estimated burden on this. Well, these guys found this, and Edward Hasbrook, he's at ConsumerTraveler.com, he went to obtain the actual new questionnaire. We have it right here on the boards behind me, but here's what they found. Quote, the U.S. Department of State is proposing a new biographical questionnaire for some passport applicants. The proposed form DS5513 asks for all addresses since birth, lifetime employment history, including employers and supervisors, names, addresses, and telephone numbers, personal details of all siblings, mother's address 1 year prior to your birth, any religious ceremony around the time of your birth, and a variety of other information. According to the proposed form, failure to provide the information requested may result in the denial of your U.S. passport application. OMB says it's going to take about 45 minutes to fill it out. I challenge you. You cannot fill this out in a day. You look at these forms, and it becomes apparent very quickly that unless you have a photographic memory, it's going to take serious research to verify all this information. So, as I'm reading these things, I mean, they're asking you, can you name the employer you had when you were 14 years old? Because here lists all the current and former places of employment in the United States and abroad. If you worked at a McDonald's when you were 15 years old, you not only have to say the company name, McDonald's, the address, the city, the county, the time employed, the supervisor, but you also have to provide his phone number. How is any of this relevant to getting a passport? Who do they not want getting out of the country? Okay? Because we're not worried about people coming in. We're worried about people going out. My first thought was, well, okay, we're trying to make sure that the passport is real. The passport is solid. Because we got to know, we have to make sure that you really are a citizen. But then I remembered, this administration doesn't care if you're a citizen. Whether you came across the Rio Grande just 10 minutes ago, you're just like somebody who's been here for 100 years. You can't ask any of these questions as an employer. Maybe it's for the radical Muslims that we don't want leaving and going connecting overseas. But then I remembered, this administration doesn't believe that radical Muslim terrorists even exist. Who are they trying to stop getting a passport and trap into our country? Or is it something more sinister? I think it's this one. Like the DREAM Act workaround. Why is it you're a racist if you ask a single question of somebody when they're coming into the country, but on the way out, you got to name the people that were present at your birth and give their phone number. Do you know the nurse that was in the room when you were born? I didn't have my pants and a pencil at the time. We reached out to the State Department earlier today, and we got a statement and a response from the State Department official a short while ago. Not shockingly, they didn't really answer any of the questions we had, just left us with more questions. You can read their full response at glennbeck.com. But we also have all of the forms. We have these up at glennbeck.com right now. I want you to go there. I want you to download this form, and I want you to try to fill it out. They say it'll take 45 minutes. No, it won't. No, it won't. I challenge you. I don't think you can complete this form by tomorrow. In a world gone mad where nothing makes sense, the only options I see here, not good. A, there's some problem that we don't know about. We can't verify citizenship. You know, outside of Donald Trump, I haven't heard about that problem. So, is there a real big problem? They say this is going to affect at least 75,000 people because they don't specify who is going to get this form. Not everybody will. You might not. Who? B, maybe this is a case for the national ID card. I don't know. C, they're trapping people here. Who do they not want leaving the country? That seems ridiculous. D, when you have the cries of the undocumented, hear me, when you have the cries of the undocumented, and no one will help, Congress won't act, call in Cass Sunstein, who's a guy who could say, well, wait a minute. Instead of trying to document the undocumented, why not make the documented undocumented? You figure it out. Read it. Try to fill this form out. Try to do it in 45 minutes. You can't. Read it now at glennbeck.com. We're covering an awful lot of territory today. I told you just recently, at the top of the hour, about 35,000 deaths in Mexico in the last 4 years. Meanwhile, to put that into perspective, 35,000, that's the number killed in Korea during the Korean War, and there have only been 8,800 civilians that have been killed in the last 4 years in Afghanistan. That's a war zone. The other is our border. Which one would you consider more dangerous? Our border is quickly becoming one of the most dangerous places on earth. Mexican drug cartels are now pushing up into the United States. They're visible in 230 American cities right now. No word from the DOJ on this one. They have no problem crossing our border. But as I just showed you, Americans who are trying to get passports legally to leave the country, they're facing a series of new questions that have Cass Sunstein's fingerprints all over them. It would make Jack Bauer cringe. Why don't you just put nipple clamps on Americans over this? The biggest crisis our nation has ever faced, however, isn't being caused by enemies outside of our country. It is being done from an enemy within. And that enemy is called the Fed. While the president tries to blame speculators for the insane gas prices that we're hitting, I want to show you and continue to beat the drum on why this is really happening. There are new charts I want to show you today. I want to thank Kevin Metters, who helped put this together. He has an article that I read last night, charting the course to $7 gas. It's a great article. Find it at glennbeck.com and see the charts for yourself. I want to show you the first chart. First chart is from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, so you know it's credible. It's from them. This is the adjusted monetary base. This means how many dollars are we printing? This is 1980. How many dollars are we printing? Here's the dot-com bubble. See this? Can you pull in on one of the cameras? Get in as close as you can and see this little teeny, closer than that, a little teeny bubble right here. See it? It just goes up and then it comes right back down. All right? Then you have this slow slope up. Now, let me show you. That's the little blip. That's the panic, the dot-com. Print more money. Interest rates from 6.5 down to 1%. There it is. But steady increase, and now let me show you what happens with TARP. Here's TARP. I believe this is actually the stimulus here. This first spike is TARP, and then it is stimulus package. Got it? Significant spike. Now, let's see what's happened since. This is how much money we have printed. Little blip with Alan Greenspan and the dot-com bubble. Little blip here again for September 11th. Look at this. TARP, stimulus, QE2. This is incredible. Now I want to show you what's called the excess reserves chart. This chart shows how much is in the repository institutions, how much money is in the bank, all right? See if you can see that this is 1960. So all these years, it's pretty flat. How much, for 50 years, how much money the banks have in reserve. They have this in reserve, and then they lend it out to people. But you'll never guess what happens right around 2008, 2009. Oh, here's September 11th. They load up on reserves. Here's TARP. They're holding on to it. Now the banks are holding on to much more money, which brings us to today. Look how much money they have in reserve. When they say the banks have the money, they're right. The banks do have the money, but there's more to that story. You don't want them to release this money. You think inflation is bad now. So what are the banks doing? They're investing in treasuries and they're collecting the interest on it. They're making money. No debate now in Congress on whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. That's what they're talking about. No debate on this. But on the debt ceiling, yes. And Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner says it's ridiculous to have a debate on this. We're on track to hit our debt ceiling of $14.3 trillion by May 16th. We have a record deficit of more than $1 trillion. So let's take a look at this next chart, which tracks the federal deficit. Here it is, surplus or deficit. Got it? 1945. This is the war. Look at the deficit we were in. Here you come. Here's the Reagan period. Then we get into Clinton. And now we get into 2000. All right, here we go. Next. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Clinton. We come back out into Clinton, and we have actually a surplus. Then what happens? We go into the Bush years. Come down here. Remember when this was bad? Go ahead. Next. This is Obama. Yeah, that's kind of bad. Suddenly, $400 billion deficit doesn't look so bad now, does it? And this next chart is the one you need to watch. This is the velocity of money. I didn't understand this 2-3 years ago. I remember being up in bed, actually pissed, because I was reading about the money supply, and I'm like, I'm never going to use this in my whole life. What am I going to use this for? Velocity is the key. You remember when I showed you the first chart where it showed the spike on how much money? The velocity is pretty low right now because banks aren't lending. It means the speed of which money is leaving. So we know the Fed is printing money like it's a game of Monopoly. We know the banks are sitting on that Monopoly money. But you don't want that money to leave the bank and have any real velocity. Here's what happened in the 90s. We're putting our money back into our savings account for every dollar that is deposited. Of our money, it can be loaned out 9 to 10 more times by the banks. Look at the past decade. Here we are in decline. Now watch this. The homes start to come apart. Velocity is slow. Not a lot of money being lent out. You see a slight uptick in the past recent months. Good, right, wrong. When velocity spikes, it leads to more inflation. The more money that is available, the more the dollar is devalued. We must raise the interest rates to bring all of that money back from the first chart. Bring it back into the Fed. But that's going to hurt. I wonder if Ben Bernanke will be asked during his first press conference, not his. When I say his, I mean the Fed. The first press conference the Fed has had in 97 years. Something wicked this way comes. It's the destruction of your country. It is the biggest theft of freedom and money the world has ever seen. And it is being done by the Fed. And they're about to stand before you tomorrow in their first press conference in 97 years and say, we're just like you. No, they're not. They're not even governmental politicians. That is a private corporation. Why is no one on the left looking at this?
Are you a parent?
If a company wants a federal government contract, from now on, it has to first disclose if the company or any of its executives gave more than $5,000 in political donations. Now, this is being done by executive order by the president, and you'd ask yourself, well, I mean, why? So they can get those people up to the front of the line faster? It's being drafted in the White House now. White House Press Secretary Jay Carney has confirmed that the work is, happening for this executive order. Now, here's another chilling development along the same lines. We've learned from the Wall Street Journal that there's a government attempt to oust a longtime drug company chief executive. This guy, this is his company, over his company's marketing violations. Now, this is raising alarms in that industry and beyond about a potential expansion of federal involvement in the business world. Do you think so? Apparently, there's a little-used administrative policy under the Social Security Act that allows HHS, Health and Human Services, to bar corporate leaders from doing business with the government if there has been criminal misconduct. HHS has alerted the industry that they're now going to be enforcing this rule. Cass Sunstein, so good to see ya. I should add that the Defense Department and the EPA also has powers similar to the HHS exclusion authority. You play ball with these people or they'll shut you down. Meanwhile, on the progressive cable channels that nobody watches, they're no doubt even asking right now why people would even hint that this president or this administration might have big government socialist, or dare I say it, thug-like tendencies. After all he's doing is forcing private businesses to jettison their CEOs and their founders, taking over GM and Chrysler, taking over 1/6 of the U.S. economy by inserting the government into healthcare industry and passing the most sweeping control of financial regulation and industry that the country has ever seen. He's practically J.P. Morgan himself. He loves business and corporations and capitalism just that much. Except every action he takes tells us something different. And by the way, he'd also like you to know that he loves information. He just has a problem with some people like me that make it confusing for you. So they're also doing their best to shut down anyone who would confuse you with information that might be a little different than theirs. What a country. I have to tell you, just in the break, I was just making a list of all the people, because I just looked at Joe, one of the guys who works with me. He's the chief of research, and I said, Joe, I mean, now that we've added the Fed, is there anybody else besides Satan that we could just hack off? Is there anybody? Muslim terrorists, 9/11 truthers, the birthers, the media, political class, 2 presidents, the unions, George Soros, corrupt corporations, the Fed, social elite, universities, communists, drug cartels, social justice faith, ELF and ALF, and the new Black Panthers. My gosh, there's going to be a celebration at my funeral someday, isn't there? Holy cow. I bring this up because of the next two shows. I've been saying something that I finally heard a woman in Germany say. She was at an Islamic extremist rally out in the streets of Germany. This guy was preaching hate. She's surrounded by men, and yet she said this. Watch. Why are you keeping your mouths shut? Where are the people standing up, she says. Tomorrow, we're going to show you the people standing up. Tomorrow, and from here on out. Courage. Courage. Don't miss it. I want to show you something, and I'll explain this on tomorrow's program. Please watch tomorrow's program. George Washington, Constitutional Convention. The phrase that is over this in this painting is the answer that we seek. I'll begin to show these things to you tomorrow from New York. Good night, America.